If we start off with the lady over there, if you could give your name and if you represent an organisation, that would be great. Can you hold on for 1 second, please? Sorry, I think we're going to get a microphone. Great. Okay, while we're waiting. Just one quick thing that comes to mind. Just one kind of comment that I've kind of got is there's an awful lot said about taxpayers and value for money, which has heard a lot about the last sort of year or two. I'm just wondering, how does this, Europe just seems this sort of big beast that's miles away from your average person on the street. These kind of changes that are proposed, or these ideas, how is that actually going to really trickle down? How do you communicate those kind of messages to the person on the street from a taxpayer's point of view, and who don't look? Chris.
Oh, okay. Well, the first thing is you want to keep the taxpayers engaged, don't you? You want them to be supportive of what you're doing. And as I said in my comments, the majority, I get more letters complaining. When David Cameron came back from Pakistan, having promised well over £500 million to essentially educate poor youngsters in that country, the mailbags of politicians in the House of Commons just went through the roof with people who were against that policy. It took an awful lot of explaining, a number of letters to and fro, personal visits, and the lot. On these sorts of things, you've got to take the people with you, and there are questions being raised in the national newspapers on a regular basis about the value for money that aid contributes. How you then and that's difficult enough at a national context where they can actually see, they know the government's made a decision, and they can, after a while, begin to understand why that decision was made possibly. Take it up to the European context where the process is way more bureaucratic, it's not as transparent. Just to make the point, I was finishing my comments earlier because we only had 7 minutes and I was going to ramble on for a bit longer. But in 2007, in 2008, in 2009, when the Court of Auditors looked at those EU budgets, in the aid part, they couldn't give a clean opinion of how money was spent. There are issues here, and it's very difficult to, one, identify them because of the complex nature in the way that the European Commission and aid is delivered, and it is then very difficult to quantify them because everyone here wants to lift people out of poverty. It's just a question of making sure that we get the bang for our buck that we can. And if we are comfortable with leaving European Commission mid-table, we're not going to take criticism from anyone because that's terrible and it's not going to be heard, then I think we're in a bad place because we want everybody to be at least as good as the DFID aid package, and actually a darn sight better than that, surely. And actually, as a demanding purchaser of a service, that's what we should demand.
Okay. I think we have a microphone now. Great. This lady's just there.
Thank you. I'm a victim of conflict-insensitive aid for half a century to Sri Lanka, and that applies to many other countries as well. That brings us to the second point. British researchers have been telling the British parliamentarian of their research on the half a century of aid that making war history will only make poverty history. And the third point, concept of aid must be changing with the time. It is not necessarily giving money or material. It should include the behavior of the developed countries as well. A lot of the money that is given to the developing countries, only a fraction go to the poor people, but a lot end up in the pockets of the elites there. There is a lot of corruption there. And then oppression there, and war there. And Britain, coming to Britain's aid, Britain was in the CMAG Commonwealth Ministerial Action Group from 2006 to 2009, when Sri Lanka, there has been killings in the thousands, and the Britain didn't open its mouth at the CMAG meeting. Sri Lanka was not taken at all at CMAG for 4 years when Britain was there, or for a long time. But things are going to change because they have appointed an eminent persons group, and they are going to make a big change there. So Britain could have made its voice at CMAG instead of giving money.
Okay.
It has created genocide there. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take a sort of 2 or 3 comments. So is there any more comments, questions? Mm-hmm. Yes, you at the front.
My name is Roger Dewar, and this evening I'm here as at Joe Public. And I just wanted to know if there were any comments, positive or negative, or possibly complete denials on 2 media reports in the last couple of months. One in one of the Sunday papers, where Jonathan Rose went to India and found that the Indian civil service was actually suggesting that Britain and the EU keep aid because it wasn't actually getting to where it ought to go. It was merely lining the pockets of people who were already fat enough, which echoes, I think, what the previous speaker was suggesting. And the other one was another figure which was suggested, which was that the EU members, the elected members going on fact-finding tours and so on, claims for expenses actually exceeded at something like 250 million euros in 1 year the amount of aid that actually got delivered to recipient countries. Thank you.
Can you remember what newspapers they were in? Just
Daily Mail?
Yes, I think the last one was in the Sunday Telegraph. I stand corrected.
Okay. Great. And yes, this.
My name is Groot. I'm an independent consultant on forest economics. Before I come to my question, which has to do with the subject of this meeting, EU aid, what is it for? What is the purpose of it? Could I just make 2 quick comments, or comments from the field, as it were? I worked a lot with projects, in development projects, and I'm a great fan of EU and EU aid, but I got the impression that there were 2 problems. The EU-financed projects were not always properly supervised, I think. In the World Bank, for example, we used to visit a project twice a year, usually several consultants in every time. And if the project was going badly, it would be stopped. The other thing was I had a friend who worked for a couple of years in Brussels with a European Development Fund. His job was, within his discipline, to evaluate all the projects that were suggested, the project ideas. And he resigned after a couple of years because he found whether he said it was a good project or a bad project, they were all financed. So those are just 2 quick comments. My question is this. I get the impression that the EU is doing a great work on a regional level within the European Union in our disadvantaged regions. For example, in the UK, in Cornwall, in Shropshire, in Wales, in the Highlands of Scotland. If you build a factory there is some sort of support from the European Union, the regional fund. And to me, to go back to this question, what is it all about, the EU aid? Well, in my opinion, it should be all about job creation. Not necessarily direct job creation, but indirect. If you give, the jobs should be created by the private sector, but by stimulating the private sector, like the European Union regional development policy does. So my question is, can't the international aid take some ideas from the regional aid?
Thank you. Should we sort of look at some of these questions? Guys, do you want to?
Certainly on CMAC and the role of the UK, and in particular, since that's not a particularly European issue, but of course everyone has been very concerned about Sri Lanka and the situation of the Tamils. But, you know, I think it's not fair to suggest that there hasn't been deep concern. Certainly when I was in the Foreign Office as a minister, there was deep concern and I think active encouragement for peace and proper treatment of the people in that country. On India, I mean, there's a lot of kind of hearsay here, you know, that if you read something in a newspaper that says that money goes down the drain or that some clerk somewhere in India says these things, you know, I don't know whether it's really right to give full credibility to journalists or others who have maybe an axe to grind on this kind of thing. I mean, in 15 years in the European Parliament and working on international development, I did see things that I didn't care for, but never some of the things that, you know, that I've heard even this evening. It just was not the case that there was this level of incompetence and uselessness from Commission members. I mean, when I used to go to I've had both experiences, going as a minister with the UK government and going as a member of the European Parliament and chairing a major part of our work with the ACP. I always felt that there were strong conditionalities, there were strong rules on good governance and on rigorous scrutiny of what was happening. You know, I'm sure if you looked at any budgetary process, you would find shortcomings. But I have to say that if that did occur, it was always the case, and if the Parliament raised these issues, it was always the case that immediate action was taken. We had absolute access to AIDCO, where the financing was done in order to have discussions, and I'm sure people from ODI and others who are here would also confirm that there is a really impressive openness about the Commission in terms of their willingness to speak to people and to take account of what they say. I was also an MEP representing Wales, and you mentioned Wales as being a recipient of European structural funds, and of course we got that not because we were pleased that we met the criteria, which is of being having very low levels of GDP, but nevertheless I don't think, having worked in international development and worked and living in Wales, that you can compare working in those two different circumstances. And certainly what we understand, that what we are trying to do through international development is access to decent work. That's one of our objectives. All of us would say that. And it is about, yes, we use the word poverty, but it's also about dealing with entrenched poverty. I mean, that's one of the things I know now that the Commission is looking at. It's looking very closely at how you deal with the hard-to-reach poor people who are actually not appearing in MDG figures and statistics. So, you know, there's a lot of things we can say, but I would say, as far as finally on the EDF and ACP, the conditionalities are very strict. It's a treaty. What we do with the ACP is not some little organisation. It's a treaty. The Cotonou Partnership Agreement is a treaty arrangement with strong conditionalities. And if a government doesn't behave properly, then the conditionalities kick in, as they did immediately with, for instance, Zimbabwe. So, you know, I think you do need to step back from the kind of knee-jerk response to some of the things that we hear and see about what the European Commission is doing.
Yes.
Just as a researcher, I prefer to deal in analysis rather than anecdote, I guess. And here is the CGD Brookings review, which on the crucial issue of transparency and learning ranks the European Commission second out of 31 donors. So that's its highest score on that indicator, and that suggests that there may be something we should take away about whether or not they are open and sharing in the way that Glenys quite rightly suggests. Look, I think we need to be extremely pragmatic. I like very much the phrases that Chris has used, that we are a critical friend of Brussels and we should be a demanding purchaser. Those are quite right, and it is a very instrumental and not ideological approach to Commission aid with which I fully agree. But it does seem to me that on the Open Europe side of this debate, you can't quite have it both ways, because that is presented as, if you like, a headline approach to the problem. But when we get into the finer print of the analysis, we're told that the European Commission believes in centralisation as an underlying principle, that its only legitimate role is to coordinate other people's aid and delegate and allow national administrations to run their own aid programs, and that when we talk about voluntary contributions, the strong implication is that voluntary contributions would be very much less than they are now, probably approaching zero. So although we have a very pragmatic, non-ideological headline, it does seem to me that your conclusions don't have that character and are very much more focused. And I think that's a pity, because if the analysis and the conclusions were consistent with the headline, we would have a much more structured conversation. So I'd like to ask you really to challenge you on whether or not your headline and your analysis are consistent, and why you reach these very strong conclusions that you do.
Well, I guess this comes down to the main point about voluntary contributions. As I said in my speech, I think there are two reasons for that. One is democratic accountability. I mean, when I read the DFID reports on the analysis of these separate programmes, the EDF and the Central Commission budget, the Central Commission budget being the main focus or main channel for spending aid, and the EDF is the one that DFID rates higher than the main Commission budget. And it says that the UK can drive much better performance with the EDF precisely because it feels that its contribution is voluntary. And Simon said earlier that our contributions to the EU, main EU aid budget, are also voluntary, which is not entirely true, because that is also bundled up in EU budget negotiations, which also involve regional policy, which the gentleman mentioned there, farm spending, the whole bundle of the EU budget, where the EDF is a separate aid stream. So I think that's slightly unfair to make that comparison. And the point about democratic accountability is that if the UK is saying it's getting better value for money out of one stream than the other, how does the UK action that? How does the UK get better value for money? How can it really change the main central EU budget if it is part of this big bundle of the EU budget that is negotiated every 7 years, which involves trade-offs about things that have nothing to do with aid? It's to do with agricultural spending in other states. It's to do with regional spending, internal EU spending. So I think that's a discussion that needs to be had. The second point is about focusing money where you think it's best targeted. And in my opinion, the current range of objectives and priorities makes it very difficult to evaluate individual aid streams. So, I mean, and like Glenys said, that we thought aid to Kosovo wasn't warranted. That's not what we were suggesting. We made the point that it's in the top 10 recipients. The question is, should it be? Should it be lower down the list? Should it be higher up the list? And that's what we're trying to get at. And the question is, if you let member states have more say over that, where would those countries fall on the list? I mean,
why don't we answer that question, Liz? Where would you put Kosovo on the list?
Where would you put them?
It's not me to decide.
But you're criticising. I mean, why can't you? I can't follow your argument. Our near neighbours are extremely important to all the member states and to all of us, because it is about the peace and security where we live.
Sure, I understand.
And therefore, if we didn't have a neighbourhood policy funded by the 27 member states and decided on by consensus by the 27 member states on how they spend it, including our country. I mean, I've been to council meetings where these discussions take place, and they agree on positions on all of these things.
No, I think you're right, that there is obviously a case for having aid to near members. The question is how much and what it's spent on. And these are decisions that should be made as close to citizens and taxpayers as possible, and that's my argument. And in response to our report, the Dutch Europe Minister said that we think money should be spent in places like Turkey, but not as much as is being spent now. And the Dutch Parliament had a debate, and they were very in favour of our proposals. And the point is, once you have a disconnect between what's happening in national politics and what's happening at the EU level, it undermines the whole exercise, and you may undermine public faith in aid per se. And the point we're trying to make is that when decisions are made close to the citizens, you have more chance, as Chris said, of carrying them with you.
So with Kosovo then, the situation where it should be sort of DFID should be deciding that as opposed to allowing that to be discussed?
No, but the point now is that the EU aid budget does so many different things. It's very difficult to evaluate how much whether the EU aid spent in accession countries or neighbour countries.
It's all in the budget. It's all there, and it's all scrutinised by the Parliament. If you take the trouble to look at it, you would see very clearly, and I don't know whether you ever had anything to do with the DCI scrutiny. It's absolutely changed from when you were talking about being on the Budget Committee and on budget control in the past, you know, quite a long time ago, as I understand it. So, you know, I think I would admit when you and I first became MEPs, things did need a lot of shaking up. And it's happened. So why can't we just accept that there has been real progress, still things need to be done, and you have the European consensus, you've had the Green Paper, you've got a lot of activity. The Commission is not saying it's all great and that we don't need to do anything. On the contrary, you know, they're agreeing that there's things that need to be done. And we mentioned the Dutch Parliament, and we, you know, a government that in the past that the Dutch were very, very engaged with the European Union, and since a change of government they are not. But you name me another member state of the European Union who is prepared to say the same kind of things and likes your pamphlets. Okay. I mean, there's 26 more, there's 25 more, but you know, I haven't heard of any more do. And you talk about voluntary. Two things that worry me about this voluntary suggestion is one of the issues that we have is on meeting the Millennium Development Goals. We need to have many more of the member states fulfilling the pledges that they've made to meet the 0.7 and to meet the targets for the Millennium Development Goals. If you make it voluntary, I think what you would do would excuse member states from cutting their aid. You would lose that control that you need to have. And also, if you make it voluntary, you'd exclude the European Parliament scrutiny as well. Because you don't have any scrutiny by the Parliament of the EDF.
Can I briefly say a couple of things and then we can spread it out to other people with comments?
Because there are things that we can agree on, and I agree with most of what Glenys just said again. Because I don't want to be too positive about it all, but you know, EU aid delivery has improved, is improving, but that's because we are asking more of it, because we are being more critical and we are demanding more. So I don't think there's much of a difference between, and we should welcome the fact that people are contributing to this debate, not the fact, whatever the conclusions might be, at least this is a positive step forward in the debate that we're having in this place. We can agree, and to answer the lady over there, the one thing that drives more people into poverty than probably anything else is actually conflict. And the more we can do for conflict prevention, the better we could, you know, the more we will do in bringing people out of poverty. And that's something that the EU, the European Commission, with the 27 member states, without its colonial past that we might have, that some countries might have a hang-up over the UK about, could do an awful lot more in. No, I know they do, but they could do more in. We also, I agree with the gentleman there that job creation is a fantastic way forward. Trade is a fantastic way forward, a brilliant way of raising people out of poverty. I tend to think the Premier League and the selling of mobile phone SIM cards has brought so many people out of poverty. It's something that we should all be envious of in the aid community, because it's something, if we'd have thought about it, we'd have probably had a couple of committees in the European Union to think about it for 10 years before we actually did anything. But I just want to answer Roger's point more than anything else, because as a critic of European stuff, I'd look at these things and I sometimes think, you know, that's rubbish. The second point you made about the cost of all these visits and stuff. Too many visits go on, I'm absolutely sure. Too much money is wasted, but it's nowhere near that sort of level. You know, that's bunkum, I'm afraid. And I'd agree with Glenys about the Indian aid. You know, I'm sure that is absolutely not the case, but I cannot be as positive in saying it's that. But I just want to go back to the point that there is not too much difference between us, and I just want to get way better value for money, because, Madam Chairman, as you saw from the first three questions, there is a job to be done in taking the public with us on this issue.
Questions? Oh, lots. Middle there.
My name is Wojciech Lubowiecki, and I have to admit I work for the European Commission. I have to apologize because I know that for some members of the panel and perhaps some members of the audience, I represent the evil empire. So I need to apologize for not wearing my customary Darth Vader outfit. But to be serious, I would like to start with responding to the questions from the audience that were, I'm happy to hear, partially answered by Mr. Chris Hutton Harris. The question about India, the problem that we have with Indian government is not that there's corruption in EU aid. The problem is that India, in fact, doesn't want to receive EU money. This is a middle-income country. This is a rising, world power. So, as you will know, they have the space program. They have plenty of money. But on the other hand, they've got plenty of poor people. So the dilemma for the EU as for Britain is, how to engage with India, whether the best way is to provide them the money that they really didn't want to accept, or whether to look at other ways of helping them to help their own citizens. And actually, the EU, as the British government, is actively looking at the number of countries that it is engaged with, and it's not 17, or it's not 50, it's not 27 countries. The target number for DFID, it's 150 countries or so. But we're looking at the list of countries, and we will be trying to find the best way of engaging with each one of them. Now, on the mission budget for EU officials, total rubbish. This is nothing. I mean, these figures are nowhere nowhere close to reality. I can tell you that I'm heading a unit that had a mission budget of €14,000 last year, and whenever we have a request to participate in conferences, we have to reject. I mean, it's a bit embarrassing sometimes. So it's nothing like the amount of money that you quoted. Now, let me go back to the panel and answer a few of the points. To start with the report that we've seen and we've heard about, it is an independent report, but it is not an impartial report. And in fact, we challenge a lot of statements, and there's no time for me to go through point by point. But I invite everybody who are interested in hearing our response. I can send you an email with the explanation of what we think about the arguments that we used there. And actually, when the story was picked up by the Sunday Times, we tried and explain our position, but we got as far as one tiny paragraph that was really not representative to our position. But this is one of the issues about the EU aid in the UK. It's an easy target to pick up on. It's an easy target when you have the majority of media clearly against anything that has to do with the EU. But all I would like to point out is that it might be an easy target, but it's a wrong target. My point is, it's easy for the UK the UK that is heading for 0.7% of its budget spent on international development to have a debate whether we should go for bilateral aid or whether we should go for the EU, whether we should be spending 80% through DFID and 20% through the European Commission, or maybe we should go for 100% versus 0%. But the problem is that in many other European member states, the level of commitment for international development is far, far from 0.7%. We're talking about 0.08% or 0.07%. And the majority of their commitment to international development actually goes through the EU. So if we make these contributions voluntary, we will go down to probably negligible figures. So there is this element to think about.
Sorry, I'm going to be really rude here. Can I ask you to wind up quite quickly, because there's quite a few hands went up and we've...
Okay, sorry, I will be very quick. I just want to respond to one point in the report, accountability. I don't know whether you're aware of how accountable EU aid is. It's not that it's something that's made up by one set of EU bureaucrats that is audited by another set of EU bureaucrats. Every pound, every project, every country program is being scrutinized and approved by all member states, including the EU and including the UK, and also through by European Parliament. So there's a lot of scrutiny. Finally, NGOs mentioned by Mr. Heaton Harris. Actually, it is interesting that most of NGOs, the big NGOs, actually get the funding through the EU and through the national budget. So when we pointing to them and saying, okay, these are the great examples, let's not forget that the money they're getting is actually through the, this is the taxpayers' purse.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you very much. Gentleman here in the blue jacket.
Thank you. My name is Zita. I am an independent economist. And I'd like to make some comment about EU economic aid. But before to put forward my questions, by the way, I'm originally from the Democratic Republic of Congo. So I'd like to make some comment before. Starting with Mr. Simon Maxwell. You said about military expenditure. I'm not sure whether you can tell us the expenditure of Uganda and Rwanda. Rwanda is the main recipient of UK and EU aid, and Uganda. This country, I will call them, they are criminal countries, which UK still is backing. Uganda was fined or was found guilty by the International Court of Justice 3 or 4 years ago, and Uganda has to pay the Democratic Republic of Congo $10 billion. Since then, Uganda hasn't paid a penny. So now, when you talk about poverty, I would like to turn to the ODI. I have some problem with ODI. The use of African pictures in ODI publication. There are too many African pictures in it. It is a propaganda. Now, if we look here, we are talking about economic aid. I didn't see any picture of Indian, Chinese, Bolivian, but only an African boy who is learning how to write. 4 days ago or 3 days ago, yesterday, the UNESCO released a statistic about the number of analphabet adults in the world. The total number is around 756 million. Of these 756 million, more than 50% are clustered only in 4 countries: China, India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, which means more than 380 million. You divide it by 4, you get around 95 million illiterate adults by countries. Now, the remaining 380, let us take it, divide it by 47 African countries. How much do you get?
We're very short for time, so your general point was about...
So my general point now, my question is, there is no such thing as EU economic aid. It is the main EU economic aid is EU structural fund, EU regional fund, because this is taxpayer money going to those countries, and there is no difference between what you give to Africa or to Asia or to the true aid if European aid to...
Okay. Thank you very much. Gentleman behind in the blue shirt. Yeah.
Hi. I also have a confession to make. I work for Open Europe. I'm its director, in fact, so I apologize to everyone here for not being a little Englander. I'm actually neither little nor an Englander, so I'm not fulfilling that criteria. Thank you so much for putting on this debate. I think it's been very illuminating and very interesting. I do have just a couple of points, I suppose. Baroness Kinnock, you spent a lot of time talking about EU membership, EU engagement, almost linking what we're saying in our report to EU membership. And I can see why you're doing that, but I would strongly advise against making that link. Because in this country, as opposed to support for the EU, support for overseas development aid is actually still fairly strong, whereas support for the EU is dropping. So if just advising you to delink those two issues, because that would help your cause as well, probably as ours. So I understood that we came here to discuss overseas development aid and the EU's effectiveness in overseas development aid, not EU membership. So let's stick to that, I think. On your second point, you asked about if there are any other countries that pick up on our pamphlet. On our aid and EMP pamphlets, this Swedish Christian Democrats, for example, who are strongly engaged in aid issues and who work closely with SIDA, the Swedish Development Agency, picked up on it, endorsed it, a couple of the politicians, and we had a very good debate with them. And what came out of the end was a consensus that, yes, let's try to work with the Commission to make this more effective. So your characterization of our pamphlet as being picked up by a minority people or a few tabloids is not correct. But let me ask you this. Do you think that the European neighbourhood policy has been effective in the Maghreb region and in North Africa in terms of providing the right incentive, in terms of focused aid, and in particularly, absent the incentive of enlargement, do you think EU aid in that particular region has been effective, and how do you think it should be improved?
Great. Does the panel want to come back? Glenys, would you like to come back on the last point?
Yeah, on the last point, I think the neighbourhood policy, whether it be the new member states to the east, or whether it be the Maghreb, those policies have been essential, but of course driving the policies that the European Union had in North Africa was, of course, as you will, I'm sure, acknowledge, a massive interest of the member states in various aspects of what was on offer in North Africa. And it was not international development in the same sense that it has been in other parts of the world. It is not a DFID type work that was being done there. It's only now, it's the first time that this kind of development assistance has gone into those countries. But it won't be necessary to do that for health and education. A country like Libya has high literacy rates and a health system and so on. But on the other hand, they need support and assistance to build capacity to have good governance and rule of law and democracy building in their country. So that's something I would admit, that I think not only the European Union but all the member states who are involved in the Maghreb also have to answer questions about why it was that the
EMP hasn't been effective in the Maghreb.
Sorry?
Has the EMP been effective in achieving its objectives in the Maghreb region? It's a yes or no question.
What objectives? How do you define the objectives before the Arab Spring?
Well, exactly. How do you define
Well, that's what I've just done. Sorry, what I said was that the objectives were not ones of sort of pure international development, because what they did not do and what they should have done was invest in more understanding of the need to challenge sometimes governments like Libya, where we were all very friendly with them. Not the UK was, the European Union member states, and all over the world, the US, everybody was. So there was a huge miscalculation. So I don't think that's got anything to do with EU aid and whether that's right or wrong, because it was something that was common to all donors and all those who were engaging with that part of the world. And now I think the lessons have been learnt, and it's been necessary to ensure that now they do invest in responding to the need for democracy and freedom of speech and media and so on. And that's what they have to do now. So it's been a very difficult difficult lesson and a very terrible one. But I mean, that's what they have to do. But I mean, I would like to say that somebody mentioned NGOs, but it's very clear that, you know, Oxfam, Save the Children, Christian Aid, CAFOD, they've all very clearly said, every single one of them, that they think that tackling global poverty is something that the European Union has a critical role in being involved in that. And also what they talk about is what we don't want. If you have lots of everybody dabbling in everything, then you have a duplication, and that's obviously wasteful. And you go to any developing country, and anyone who visits developing countries, they say, oh, we have 30 different forms to fill in for projects and programs, you know, and they come piling in, and their offices are full of answering questionnaires and filling in programs. The more you concentrate on people working in a coordinated, coherent way, one of the ways the European Union can do that is like they're doing now in South Sudan, in a new country, is building coherence amongst member states of the European Union towards making sure that we can see the kind of progress that country needs to see. So I go back to my main point at the beginning, which is we are living in an interdependent multilateral system. So one country on its own needs to be part of that, and that applies to the UK.
So does that mean, that answer, that you'd like to see that all the DFID aid be channeled through the European Commission, so there's just one source of supply?
Not at all, of course not. I'm not saying that, because and no member state would ever say that. They all want to do their...
I didn't want to put words into your mouth, but I didn't want you to put words into mine either, so I just wanted to make the point.
I wasn't referring to you, I don't think.
Okay, we're very tight for time. Hello, you at the back, waving. Great.
Hi, I'm Alan Howard, I'm from ActionAid, and sorry I'm late, I was a bit late, that's why I've
You're up there.
stranded up here. But very interesting debate, and it's quite timely for us because we've just today issued a report on aid called Real Aid 3, and I think the question of value for money that the government raises, and which is very important, I don't think our approach is that it's a question of how aid effectiveness is tied to reducing aid dependency. It's not based, in other words, on how good the quality of the aid, not the amount, and not necessarily, the most effective use of aid is to reduce aid dependency. So we haven't analysed the multilateral donors like the EC, but I think it would be interesting. I mean, I suppose I would ask the panel how they feel the EC is doing on this, but that would be our approach to measuring the value for money that the EC is delivering. One finding that we definitely have in the report is that it's important for government ownership, that the recipient government needs to own the projects that are being undertaken by aid. For aid to be real, it needs to be owned by the government. So that would contradict, I think, we're in favour of, in most cases, of direct budgetary support, because that's when the government does have control over the aid. Of course, there are limitations to that, but in general, we would say that direct budgetary support is a good thing, other things are being considered. So, but yes, the report was just issued today, so I guess there's a plug there for that.
Great, thank you very much. We are out of time, but I just want to wonder if we can just have a 60-second concluding remarks from our panel. Okay, so Chris, do you want to start off?
I'd like to thank the man from the European Commission for apologising. It's really kind of you. The fact that you said that you're the middleman begs the question, why the middleman? But I don't want to ask that question because I don't mean it in that way, but it just begs the question. I guess I conclude by echoing what President Kagame of Rwanda, which I know is not your best friend here, but wrote in his article in the FT about how aid is delivered and what sort of aid it is. There is a job to be done. We've got to raise people out of poverty. No one in this room would disagree with that. I just want to make sure that when I'm when I'm knocking on doors in my constituency, I can say we're getting fantastic value for money for the money every taxpayer puts in aid.
Great.
And I welcome the report.
Stephen.
I guess I'd like to respond to the spokesman of the Commission on the point of it being an easy target and so on. And us thinking you're evil, that's not the case, I assure you. It was generally meant to be I mean, this is a shared competence between the Commission and Member States, and the question is where does that balance lie? And that was the question we were posing, and that was the spirit in which we posed it. So that's where we were coming from. It wasn't about attacking the EU or the European Commission. And the points about smaller member states, that may well be true. That was the point of our voluntary contributions. It may well be the case for small member states that is the best way forward, but for bigger ones it may not be. The point is to introduce the option of flexibility and the option of choice for the governments whose taxpayers are providing the money, and that's the point we're trying to make. So I hope that it clearly has stirred debate, and I hope that people will go away from this at least thinking about the possibility of what we suggested. And thank you very much to the ODI for co-organising a debate with us.
Thanks. Thanks. Clearly all of us on the panel and in the room would agree that we have to take public opinion with us on these issues. There's no way that we can just sail along pretending that it's not going to be important for us to make the arguments. But I mean, I think we do that, and we show what has happened. You can list how many kids have gone to school, what needs to be done. You know, the thousands of women that die in childbirth. Those are the kind of issues that people respond to, and if we can show that we are providing resources to try to ensure that those kind of catastrophes and tragic events don't occur, because there is a health system. We're talking about countries where they don't have any health infrastructure, where they don't have desks for kids to sit next to. So this is what all this debate is about. And if the European Union is doing this work, and I think doing it well, then I think it's not really worth exercising ourselves or justify. We can't justify exercising ourselves about whether they are efficient or not efficient, because I think they've proven to be working well and have improved massively, just as DFID did over the period of time when what the key thing was that DFID, we had a minister who went into the cabinet, and we had DFID made a full department. And those kind of things do make a difference, and I think we should just really continue to work towards the fulfilment of the Millennium Development Goals. There's not much time left.
Thank you. And Simon.
When we look at this from the bottom up, from the point of view of recipient countries, the aid system has become so overburdened and so complex. 95,000 projects approved every year at a median cost of about $70,000. Sometimes 20 donors all trying to help one sector in a developing country. Coordination meetings in Mozambique, I think over 100 committees of donors, over 100 committees trying to coordinate aid to the country. One of the great values of the multilateral system is that it helps us to simplify and rationalise the otherwise chaotic nature of aid. And as we look at the multilateral system, as Glenys said right at the beginning, Europe brings some things that some others don't. The World Bank has the money, but finds it very hard to act on human rights, on foreign policy, on security issues. The UN is very good at security issues and has the legitimacy, but does not have the money. The EU does bring to the table a combination of aid and trade and political engagement, which gives it more potential than some people might think, and the challenge we all face is to make sure that it realises that potential.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our panellists for a very lively debate. Thank you for coming, and I'm sure we'll continue this debate over a glass of wine. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.